with you all and talk about a lot of things. I hope you guys are ready to like buckle up and get into this because there's no knowing where we're going. You know, it's going to be crazy. I'm the Senior Director of Engineering at Motivosity. I just switched, actually started there last week. So a little bit different. I was with Fashion File. I was a director there. I was there for 5 years. And so it's actually a really cool time to give this presentation because I talked to a lot of you about interviews and stuff like that. And I had gone a long time without going through the interview process. On the other side, I'd done a lot of interviews, being the interviewee. And now I have some really good experience in being on the interview side and going through that again. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and some cool things that I've been building on the side and how I think that could be very applicable for a lot of people here. So I had an idea a couple months ago to build something in, because ChatGPT is just really cool. Imagine who here hasn't used ChatGPT? I feel like that's gonna be you have not used it at all. Okay. Well, I don't know how much we'll go through it, so I'm gonna ask you to go through it yourself, but we're gonna talk about a couple of things here. I'm gonna put in 6 phases like a heist. We have like 6 phases of what we're gonna be doing today. And so the first thing we're gonna talk about is the idea that I had a couple months back when I started using ChatGPT. And really, it's nothing fancy. I just wanted to replicate ChatGPT. I want to make my own ChatGPT using their APIs because in the end, what I want to do is I want to build my own models. I see there's so many ways to use ChatGPT that in my mind, what I was thinking of, it would be sweet if on my personal website, I trained a model to know a lot about me. So when somebody like an interviewer comes to my website, they can ask my personal concierge all about me and they can get their own answers from my ChatGPT. So that was my goal. I wanted to throw that out there. So we're going to go through the simple version. We're not going to get all the way to there because that's a long conversation of training models and all that stuff. We're going to go like super simple. So the idea really was, so once again, we're going to talk about the idea, a really, cheesy quote. Those are a bunch of them just for the sake of it. I'll share this out after if you want to read it. But when starting your project, what do you want to make, right? And so really, I want you to think about in your mind, what are ideas? Because I'm hoping that you guys can take this and we're going to talk about a lot of things with the goal of making a project that's presentable to people. That's really the goal of this conversation. And I'm just going to show it through you doing what I did. Because I'm hoping that for those who are looking for jobs, really what you want is you want something in your portfolio that people can look at and they can be really impressed by. And I kind of mention it a lot when people come up and talk to me in these meetups. They're like, what do I need to do to get a job? And it's, well, what are you showing to people that's impressive? And so this is an example of when I kind of did that. And so what I decided to do is I wanted to build my own ChatGPT that I can then build models off of. Now, and I don't want to build my own AI, I don't want to go into SageMaker and do all that. ChatGPT actually makes this pretty simple. And so, cool, let's just use ChatGPT, which has its pretty cool information about it. So a little bit about ChatGPT, and because we're going to talk about so much today, we're only going to go superficially over ChatGPT and OpenAI in general, right? A couple of things that are important about OpenAI and how it works, right? So you have models underneath it. There's a ton of models. We might take a look at some of them. But there's some interesting parts to know about it because ChatGPT, you ask it a question, it then uses its interface to its kind of like neural network to really know how things are working. And so there's a couple of keywords that you want to know when working in OpenAI. One is tokens, which is our pieces of words. And we'll talk about this, right? So OpenAI, we're going to be using it to make something. And you can see here, I have a little graphic here. And I've included this because tokens are important as we get further into this conversation. So you can see how they're color coded here. Here's the content. When I go and ask a question, I could go and ask it, what's your favorite Beach Boys song, right? And it could come back with however many characters of a response. But it comes out to be a certain amount of words. In this case, it's 68 tokens. And you get charged per tokens, and you can only have certain responses in token size. And so this is important because we want to manage our costs, right? And so we're just going to try and learn how we can manage this appropriately. The other thing to know is temperature, which is the parameter that governs the randomness and thus the creativity of the responses. So when you go into ChatGPT and you ask it a question, what it does is kind of an advanced version of this. Who's familiar with this interface? Where when I type in something, it says store, and it starts predicting what I'm going to do next, right? ChatGPT does a certain amount of that, where it's going to take and it goes one piece at a time, and it decides what the next phrase is based off the temperature that you give it. And so if you give it a 1, it's super strict, right? And it's gonna just almost give you the exact same response every time based off of what you want it to be and what it thinks it should be almost every time. So it's not gonna be very random. But the more the temperature you lower it, the more random you become, and that's when you get crazy responses and stuff like that. So those are a couple things about OpenAI as we're going to get into this a little bit farther. And obviously, like I said, I would love to do a further conversation specifically about OpenAI, but the real goal of what I want to talk about with OpenAI is the project that I built because of what it was able to enable me to do. So when I'm building this project, I know I want to use OpenAI. I want to use, obviously they have an API built. I signed up for a token, or I signed up for an API, and they're free. Anybody here can go up onto ChatGPT. You can go and sign up. You can get an API key. So what I had to start thinking about with this project that I was building is what data do I want to be saving, right? And I had a couple criteria for my application that I wanted to abide by. So first is users can ask you questions, right? When it comes to my project, that's what I want to be able to do. People can ask you questions, give it a prompt. That's what they're called. 2, I want the application will store its history. I want to be able to store history. 2, no login or state management. I don't want to have any of it. I want to make this simple. I don't want any type of login. I don't have to worry about that whole situation. But I do want it to have a history. So those, we do those, right? And then the last one is users can have multiple conversations going, and they can switch between them. So a couple of things I was trying to accomplish in this simple project that I was like, hey, as I try and build this, obviously I can evolve it, but I'm just trying to think of what's a cool project that I could build right now with an interesting idea that I have. So what data do we need? We need one. In ChatGPT, they're called prompts. And I bet everybody's heard the term prompt engineer because we're all going out of jobs one day for them, right? So, and a prompt is just like a formatted question or something that you're asking to the system that it can then respond back with an answer, which it calls a completion. So in OpenAI, you look in their documentation and you'll see that they have a completions API. And the completions API is 2 things. One, it's if you have a question mark at the end, it's a question. If you don't have a question mark at the end, it'll finish off your statement. So if you were to say, who's the best Laker, no question mark, it would then say, who's the best Laker that played in 1970? And it'll like try and finish your thought for you. And so a lot of people use this for code, right? You might write something unfinished and ChatGPT will try and finish it for you. And so that's why it's called a completion, is that you get both sides of it. You get an answer or you get it to finish your statement. And then the last thing is a user. I'm not going to save any user data. I don't care about user data. I don't have to worry about that. But I do need to know something about the user because I need to store history. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save a UUID. I'm going to save it as a part of their session just so that while they're in there, they can keep that history, and then we'll keep it in local storage, but we'll never save it in the database. So, and I'm going to use MySQL is what I decided. So we're going to go through a lot of things, Dan. I think it's interesting. What is your name back there? Yeah, Isaac. Isaac was talking about before this, how much people are asking for, and I overheard you, and I made a face. I made a face at you because I was like, oh, that was very appropriate timing. That people on their job descriptions have everything under the sun that they want from you when you get hired. And it's like, oh, I just want to do React, right? Or I just want to do this. And so I'm going to challenge you all to be more than that because I think it's valuable to be able to, be a little diversive in your skill set. And so that's why I wanted to go over everything in this project that I'm going to build by myself in hopes to, have something cool. And so I recommend MySQL, which I feel like I don't really hear a lot of people recommend. I hear a lot of like Postgres, I hear a lot of Mongo, but a lot of companies use MySQL, which is why I'm going to recommend it to you all. Is I think there's a lot of people who use MySQL, and I don't hear that a lot. Boot camps, I don't feel like teach MySQL a lot, which surprises me a lot. And so I would recommend going with MySQL. It's a relational database. I like relational databases. They scale well. They're good. I think there's a lot of great things there. And I'm not a big fan of NoSQL. So these are just hot takes by Dano, by the way. So now we're just riffing for a second. No, I think NoSQLs are great for their purposes. In my opinion, they're a lot like serverless Lambda functions, whoever's used those. And if you've read anything about Amazon recently, they switched away from doing a bunch of Lambdas because they were like, oh, okay, we can't run a whole application off of Lambdas. We should switch it up a little bit. Yeah. 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 How many, so of people who are engineers right now and you're like have a job, how many of your databases run off of MySQL? Okay. How many people who have jobs don't use MySQL, use something else? So a couple. Nice. So yeah, but over half use MySQL. I think that everywhere I've worked has, obviously I can. So I'm just putting in a plug there for everybody here to do some research into it. I think it's worth it to have. It's a good skill set to have. Okay, and I just want to show you this. This is my script for Docker, because if anybody thinks this is confusing, this is a little Docker script that I have, and all you do is run Docker compose up. That's all you do. Docker compose up. You got a Docker on your local machine once you've installed a Docker desktop on your machine, and then you got my SQL server. So now I have OpenAI with an API set with an API key. I have a database. Now I have to build an API. So I'm kind of working from the back forward. And so I want to talk about, this has the same quote as the other one. I didn't change it. So I want to talk about with the API, what is a framework? Anybody know? Anybody got a good description of what a code, like when I talk about frameworks, if you talk about like React or Laravel or anything like that, does anybody have a good definition of what a, yeah? Okay. Nice. Yeah. What about, I hear these ones confused a lot. What is a library? Yeah.
Library could be any pre-made code that you could just download, tap into. The way you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless you like that. Yeah, we don't have to build it every time. I think of a framework as like a skeleton, right? So you have something that you're building off of. And so once again, these are all tidbits to help you build a project. So I'm just going through a bunch of things to help you hopefully build your projects and build them easily, quickly, and well. And frameworks are a pretty great place to start. You could build it from yourself by yourself, and that's a great place to learn. But I do think when you're trying to build something fast, a framework's kind of nice. Libraries are used, and we'll talk about some libraries about how to include them. So OpenAI, for example, and we can go through that, has their own node library for interfacing with their API. And so we can use a library to be able to build into what they're doing and hit their APIs. So what are some examples? I went through some. So I just want to give you an example of one that I decided I was going to use, which is Nest.js, which is a Node API framework. And I don't think actually Node frameworks get a lot of love. We hear a lot about front-end JavaScript frameworks, you know, React, Vue, Angular, Apollo, or whatever the other one is. There's one other one. It's pretty popular. You hear a lot about them. Svelte. Yeah, Svelte is one. I've actually been kind of digging this one, Nest. It's pretty cool. I would recommend it because it has a pretty awesome spin up, and I'll even show you something with it. Is in it, this is what's awesome is this is the Nest.js website. Over here is like a bunch of their different things that they have built in, and they're all plugins basically, which they don't come pre-installed, which I appreciate. Back in the day when frameworks started, they would come pre-installed, and you just get this bloated mass of software that would take forever. It's basically like your node modules that everyone's running that's gigantic. But there's a lot of really cool techniques that I would say try and install one of these and try and learn these techniques because they're things that you'll use in an enterprise solution, right? Like we use WebSockets all the time. We use things like that. And so I think it's a great place for you to go and experiment and try different things and build things. And it comes kind of pre-built for you, so you don't have to learn to do it yourself. We'll go back though. So at this point, I have the idea. I know what data I need. I have an API that I want to build. I know what application I want to use. So let's talk about a couple of things. These are the easy parts for a lot of people, which is the design. What am I building? And so obviously we can talk about what elements do I need? Am I good at design? No, I suck at design. So that's just not my forte. I'm a backend engineer, which is why I'm going to try and convince you all to do more backend because I think that's where it's a great place to be. And that's why my last one's then, should I just hire somebody, because I hate this. But I do it. I do it. So I know a lot of people here are going to be front-end engineers. You're probably a lot better than me at this, but I'm not the greatest. And so what I like to do is I like to use libraries for this. And so I use Material UI. I don't know if anybody who uses components, out of the gate, but they're just nice. They're nice to be able to have something that you can throw together and not have to worry about it. There used to be Bootstrap back in the day, and now if you see something with Bootstrap, you're like, oh, that thing's old. And then I included in here for Vue or Angular. There's the material versions of those. So then I chose Angular. I was like, I'm going to build something with Angular. My last company did both Vue and React, and I was like, well, I'm going to do Angular. How do you guys decide what front end you use? Like, how did you guys decide that you're in React, right? Like, what do you think goes into decision making when building a new project? Any your manager? Well, in this case, it's a personal project, so you're your own manager. Is there any, whatever you like? Yeah, there's no. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say challenge yourself a little bit. Yeah. 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 For sure. Cool. Thank you. So the last one's the deployment, and I don't always test my code, but when I do it in production. I just like this meme a lot. It just feels good to see somebody else feel the same way. So let's talk about the deployment. And this is the big one to me, because I feel like this is where a barrier comes in for a lot of people of like, oh, I work in local. And it's like, oh, great, send me your local machine. I don't know, like spin it up on your IP address and I'll hit your IP or something like that. I don't know what we're doing. So this is where it's important. This is where the rubber meets the road. And I always actually, like, for most engineers, you can work on a project, and it's the 80-20 rule. I feel like 80% of the project takes 20% of the time. And really the deployment and actually getting it up is the 20%, because you can throw down and like sling out code. I wrote 1,000 lines of code today. Whoa, I'm doing just killing it. But then getting that up to production, that's what takes a long time. Like, oh man, we have to test it. Now we have to like figure all these things. We have to get our code pipelines working, like have it, so there's just a lot of things there that are important. I feel like this is where a lot of people kind of stop because AWS gets scary or the CLI gets scary or something like that. And so I want to throw out a couple of things that I use, which is one, AWS Amplify. We'll go into it today. It's just so simple. If you're using a front end application, I would encourage checking it out, and we'll go through, because it's just so simple to build and deploy your front end applications in AWS Amplify. And then Amazon EC2s, I encourage this one because when you get a job, I bet a lot of people are using Amazon EC2s out there, or ECS, which are just EC2s in the end. And so I think this is a really good one to learn when you're deploying, and try it on your own and be able to go into an interview and be like, I know how an EC2 works. And people are gonna be like, holy cow, that's crazy. That's good for you. You're a junior engineer that knows how to use an EC2 or spin one up. That's great. So and the last one's a CI/CD pipeline, which is a continuous deployment. Now, for those who are newer, who wants to answer what a CI/CD pipeline is, or continuous deployment? We'll go over here.
That's when you merge or put new code on GitHub or in your version control, then it automatically tests it and automatically deploys it.
Yeah. Yeah, the key is simplifying your life, because there was a time when you're like committing, you merge it, you SSH into your server, you have to pull, you have to merge it into there, you have to then run npm install, you break your whole website, you're like, oh crap, what did I do wrong? I forgot to run my migrate. There's just all these things that can go wrong. What are you gonna add? Anything? Yeah, you can use code commit for sure. I just like GitLab. This is once again what I use, because GitLab is so simple. I don't know who's used GitLab before, but their services are pretty great. So that's why I recommend it. This is just, you can use code commit too. Code commit would be great, and you can push it up there. totally great there too. I think GitLab is very easy too, and they have great. I actually included a link in here for when I send it out of their tutorial, and I think it's so simple. And so once again, I just want to go for simplicity of like what's going to get you going, where you could get put on a resume, like, you know, send somebody a link. This deploys automatically, it has a CI/CD pipeline. It's on EC2s. It's on Amplify. It's on all these things. And you have this checkbox of like, and then when the employer asks for it, you've done it all, you know? And so why not? Why not? So the reward, right? Data's the new oil. I have that on every single one. I just want you guys to really remember it. Gaft.us. So what is Gaft.us? So 2 months ago when I said I was going to do this, I was starting this project. I was like, oh yeah, I'll be ready for this. Well, I had a baby. My wife had a baby. I should be clear. A month ago. So it's been, you know, we're on child 3. There's a lot going on right now. The other thing that happened was I decided to go and start interviewing. And, you know, I wound up interviewing with Motivosity. And it was interesting because I looked at their stack and we were talking. It's a Java stack. I don't know Java. I don't know it. Angular, I haven't used in 7 years. And I was like, I don't know. And they're an Angular with Java team. And I'm Node and I'm PHP and I'm not that, right? But I got an interview. And so I talked to them and I was like, man, these guys are really cool. Let's try this out. And so they talked to me about Java and they're like, oh, you don't know it. And I was like, look, there's one thing I know. I know how to code. Promise you, I can learn Java. And they're like, you think so? And I was like, oh, I know so. I know how to do object-oriented programming. I'm not even worried about it. They're like, okay, sure. So we get off the call. And I was like, you know what I'm going to do this weekend? I'm going to build a whole application over the weekend and we send it to them on Monday. So that's what I did. I built Gaft.us. So just to show you guys, and anybody can hit this. This is Gaft.us. And so this was my application that I decided to build. And so over the weekend, what I decided to do is I created an Angular instance. I created my own Java Spring framework, and we're not going to go through it. So that's the only part is I won't show today the REST.js one, which I'll have working by the JS conference. But I built the whole backend in Java. And so once again, I don't know Java, but I decided I was going to build it. So I built the whole backend in Java, built the front end in Angular, and I connected it to OpenAI, and I built my own little ChatGPT, which was my goal. And I did it in a weekend. I then got it up onto EC2s. So we'll walk through some of this, of how this all works. So just so you guys can see, and we'll kind of walk through some of this. So once again, in OpenAI, we have some documentation here, which is pretty easy. We have a bunch of different models here that we can use. And so what I chose was a little older. Since then, ChatGPT 3.5 has come out. And you'll see within here a bunch of different endpoints and their compatibilities. And so once again, we can see our completions endpoints. And can everybody see this? Should I make it bigger? Or is it okay? Okay. Yeah, it looks like it might be a little wonky. So I can see here all my different endpoints that I want to hit. I'm using the completions endpoint with the text DaVinci 003 is the one that I created. And, oh, perfect. Thank you, Andrew. But there's a newer one. Had I updated this in the last couple weeks, I would have changed it to probably ChatGPT 3.5. But I'm still on text DaVinci 003, and my goal was also to build my own model, which we're not going to go into building the model part or anything like that. So there's a bunch of really great guides in here. The great thing about this is if you go in here, you can actually see within their API reference, they have a nice little npm install OpenAI. So when you create your little node application, you can just install their package that they have, which is pretty great. Java wasn't so easy. I had to go to like some third party and then try and work theirs and then end up building my own because they only have a Python and a Node one. So, but that's where this becomes pretty easy. You get an API key and then you're able to just use their, and I believe they even have within here so here's their list of models. Yeah, and over here, this is how easy it is. They even have their Node.js code over here for you. That as you go and build this out, they have the models here. And so the ones that you'll want to use is I use the completion endpoint. And so this completion endpoint over here is where you're able to say what model you want to use. So they're still even using DaVinci 003 here. And then the prompt, which once again we've talked about, and then like we talked about earlier, our max tokens and our temperature. So how random do you want to make it? How many tokens do you want to have a response? So in this case, the tokens that can be responded back is 7. So that means I'm going to have a very short response. It only can be 7 tokens long. And so OpenAPI will take that and it'll make its response really small. And so that'll save you money, but you also have really, really short responses. And so they have a lot of really cool tools in here. You could go in and you could play with DALL-E or anything like that and make the cool things there, which we've done before too. But for this case, we're just doing the completions API to make my own ChatGPT. From there, I built the Angular code. We could go into that, but I feel like everybody kind of knows the front end a little bit better. What I wanted to show is in AWS. This is Amplify. So what I did is I created a GitHub, and all you have to do is you just connect a. So in this case, you would go to your apps, which I have a bunch of different apps here. You can say new app. You can build an app. You give it a name. We'll just give it a test. Oh, I did the wrong one. That was my bad. I did a backend application. I don't want a backend application. Host web app. And then you get to choose which one you want to connect to. So I'm just going to we'll do it on GitHub. We'll just deploy it again to a different location. And hopefully this all works. So here's my front end repository. I can select what branch I want to do, which is main. And then I can go next. It'll find out some information about my endpoint. I can change the build command, which is the biggest thing I love about AWS Amplify. If you try and use like Cloudflare or any of these other places, they don't have very good build and test settings. And then you can go to next, and then it will build it for you. And so then you save and deploy, and it just deploys it for you. What it ends up looking like in this case is I have my GAP front end over here. Here's my application that's built for us. I've even connected up the domain name for it, and it just deploys it. And so if I wanted to, and I wanted to spin up my own little staging environment, which is what we'll use a lot for too, I can easily go in here and I can choose a different branch. I can say, oh, this branch, which I just threw up and has some, feature development code, I can save and deploy, and now I have 2 different ones. And so it's going to build this one right now, and we're going to see how it looks, and we can test it out, and we could see if the website looks better in purple or in blue or whatever we want to do. Very easy to use. I won't go to E3C2 too much. With Java I used Elastic Beanstalk in the end. But really what I want to get to is I then took this and I put it all up. I put those 2, the front end and the back end code, onto GitHub, and I made them public, and I sent them to the employers that Monday. And I said, hey, here's my code. I told you I could learn Java in that time, and I got a second interview. And so I am getting hired by the company without knowing any Java. And so I just want to take that to say that I really hope that people can take the opportunity to put in the effort to learn and to really push yourselves. That coding is awesome, right? And if you stretch yourself a little bit, people care about that. People care about people who enjoy what they do and putting themselves out in different ways. And it's something that really matters to employers. I know for myself, when I hire, that's what I care about. And I want people who are willing to learn and adapt. And you might not know all those things right now, but I care that you're willing to kind of try things out and not just be like, I'm a React engineer and I'm putting my foot down that that's all I'm going to do. Because that's a challenging mentality. So, but just to show you, we could ask this guy a question now. Let's see. What is the best food to eat in Utah? Let's ask it what it thinks. All right. Once again, I'm not a UX UI developer, but it's not horrible as long as it works, right? We'll see. It's taking a long time. This becomes scary. Nice. Utah's, and I have 1,000 tokens is what I set it at. I like to get a nice little information here. We'll make this bigger too. Utah is known for having a wide variety of delicious food, from traditional comfort foods to international flavors. Popular choices include Mormon funeral potatoes, pastrami sandwiches, green jello, fry sauce, and Salt Lake style burritos. Okay, I know everything but this. Anybody know where I can get a Salt Lake style burrito? It's actually, one second. Where can I get a... let's ask for a friend here. Utah is also known to have a thriving craft beer scene, making award-winning brews a great accompaniment to almost any meal. Nice. All right, Salt Lake style burritos can be found at a variety of restaurants. Okay, well, this is great. This is, you know what the best part about this is I like this, but I want to save it for later. So let's just restart this. I'm going to start a different conversation around how are you doing today? Let's just see how he's feeling today. We'll see. Well, I'm doing great. How about yourself? Awesome, thank you. Well, you know what? I actually really want to remember where my history's at. So I got all my history over here. What's the best fit in Utah? I can bring it back. I can continue this conversation now. So let's talk about the API or the backend really quick. So what I did over with all of this and how this works is there's no login. You don't have to log in. Anybody who wants to hit caf.us, you can test it out yourselves. And you can see there's no login. What it does is it saves in local storage. And then what I have in my SQL, which we can open up, let me make sure yeah, it's all in there. We can come in here and we can see my very, very tiny database. No, that's not going to make it bigger. I don't know if I can make this one bigger. View, let's see. Navigator, no. Interval screen, that's not going to be it either. Okay, well, it's really small. Sorry, I don't think I can make this any bigger. But what I have is a couple things here, which are my answers, my chats, and my messages. And I don't even use messages right now, but I can see within here, oh, I think this might be my production one. That's not showing it. But really what I have here is I should be able to see users if they wanted to show up. Oh, it's because that's my local one. Let me go into the production one. And let's see how this baby looks. So I should be able to see here all of the different questions. So here are my prompts. And so I save the history here where I can come into here. And if I were to open this up, I can see over here what team won a championship here. I can see can you list me all? So I can see a bunch of different questions over here with their prompts. And it doesn't show anything because there's a line break before each of them. So the prompt originally was, can you list me all the Strokes albums, which I did right before I came here. That was my question, actually. And so there's a bunch of different questions over here. I have results. So this is how I set up my database with the UUID. All the user is over here is a username, and actually there's not even one. I don't even save it at all. I just have a UUID that keeps track of the interaction between them. And all it does is it keeps track of here UUID, and I just check of who's coming in and out. And so it's a pretty simple system. It's like 2 tables. I don't even think I use chat table here. I don't. It's just one database table that saves it all. And that's how simple it is. And so really, I just want to show you guys how simple it was to throw together something that I really believe, had I not did this, and I know for a fact, I wouldn't have gotten the job that I got. And so I feel pretty fortunate that I was able to have the time, and my wife was able to work with me on this. And so in the end, here's everything that it took to build this website, which does a lot of different things, right? I had an idea. I figured out what kind of data I needed to save. I built an API. I made a simple design for it. I then deployed it, which I think is very important to put something in the hands of the people that you want to hire you. And then I'm calling it the reward, that you have something to show people. That's what you want. You want something real to show people. And the fact that I could just give them a URL and say, check this out, means a lot. Along with the GitHub. Those are pretty great too. So with all this information, what should I do with it? It's kind of a smorgasbord. I kind of threw this together because it just was a lot of things that I thought were pretty great that I hope that can help somebody to get a job. Like, there's a lot of things out there, and really that's the goal of this whole meetup, is that those who are looking for jobs or trying to level up, how can you do it? And there's just a lot of ideas here. And so if you have questions, please reach out and let me know. But I'm really hoping you can take awesome idea and awesome technology and make an awesome project. Because I think that's the key to just finding that job, is to have an awesome project that you can show to people and impress them. So, any questions? Yeah. It's called Table Plus. So if anybody's used SQL Pro before, SQL Pro got abandoned like 5 years ago, and people still use it for some reason, even though the guy said, like, explicitly says on the GitHub, please stop using this. I won't update it for security purposes. He ended up making this, and it's great. So it's called Table Plus. Yeah. What? It is if you can use it for free, but it once you have more than 3 open database tables is when they start charging you. So I pay for it, and it's like $20 a year or something like that. It's really pretty expensive. It's pretty cheap. So Cool. Any other questions? I know this is a lot, but I hope that. The hardest
Out of
thing to figure out, I'm
curiosity,
gonna say aside from, I don't even think the Java was really that hard, except for deploying Java was a little tough of compiling a jar file, just because, you know, most of these languages we talk about are just-in-time compiled languages or transpiled languages within JavaScript, and so I haven't really worked in a compiled language before, and so it was fun to like on my own compile a language, make sure I did everything as far as typing and implementing it. And that's a great learning experience for me going into this job. And so, but outside of that, maybe, I think actually what the easiest thing was ChatGPT. Like that was honestly like, I thought that was going to be hard. Even like model building for those who are interested in that, like it's pretty simple of just creating like the model you can take one of their models and like insert a bunch of different information using a JSON file and then use a CLI. That's not that hard either. And so I was expecting that to be harder, but it's mostly around Java, to be honest, just because it was new to me. Yeah.
What resources did you use to learn Java so quickly? Did you just go through the docs? Did you follow pre-boot camp tutorials? Did you use ChatGPT to help fill in some of those gaps?
Yeah, all the above. No, a lot of Googling. You know, there's a lot of Googling. Like luckily they have pretty good documentation. And I think most I feel like frameworks get established. And somebody even mentioned it. They're like, I choose it because they have better framework. They have better documentation. I feel like frameworks will usually take off when they have an established documentation that people can rely off of. And so luckily the Java framework that I was using, Spring, had a great set of documentation. But even within those, you get to certain points where like the Spring documentation for deploying to Elastic Beanstalk, not great. And so then you have to do Googling, which should be like, if anybody here, that should be like your number one skill. If you go into a code interview and they don't allow you to Google, just be like, do I want to work at this place? Like, what type of skills are you testing me here? Like, they should want to know you're good at Googling. You know, you're good, you Googleizer. Yeah.
Yeah, when you're learning all these things and you're learning a lot of different frameworks, how do you make sure you don't spread yourself too thin? That's like one of the problems I had when I first started. I tried to learn like a bunch of things at one time, so I got very important.
Yeah.
How do you decide like what's there and what's so how to make sure that you're full?
Yeah, and I think that's why it's important to like, sorry, I talked like right into it. I think that's why it's important to have an idea and an end goal. And it goes back to what Andrew said earlier about committing to something and just committing to an idea and being like, this is what I'm going to do to accomplish what I'm going to do. Right. And so my idea was I need to build my own ChatGPT. Right. And so I wasn't trying to build like do all these things. And that's what's hard is like, this looks like a lot of stuff. And it's hard because it depends on what you're trying to do. React is pretty simple because it's like, oh, I'm going to be this one dimensional. But like, I think it's good to be like, okay, what is everything that I need? Let's get it all together. And then you realize they all just work together. Like they're not like, and that's the thing about front end and back end. And I like to be full stack because I don't think of them as separate. And for a long time they weren't like, and that's where I started PHP. PHP was an MVC and it was server side rendered. And it was all of your backend code and your front end code were all together in one application. And so I think that's why it's easier for me to think of all of that as really just one application that needs to be served up together. And then you just build all that. We'll go back here and then over here. Yeah, I do use Aurora database. So once I got into setting up my database, so that's the other really cool thing about a lot of these applications is when you're MySQL database, you get into how do I update my database? Like this is a big problem when you get into backend development. Is like if we're going to deploy something to production, how do I update my database? I don't have to be running database updates because that takes a manual intervention. And so what I think this has one. Let me find it. I think there's a techniques for database integration. There's something called an ORM. Oh, it talks about it right here. The type ORM. So what it uses is type ORM. Java uses Hibernate is what's called, and an ORM is an object relational mapper. And what it does is it takes your data. So for example, I talked to you guys about prompts, conversations, and users, right? So those could be 3 tables. And what it would do is you would write code that would then create your databases. And so as you deploy, a part of your CI/CD pipeline would be to create those databases. And then if you make changes, to update your databases. And those are done in an ORM along with some migration scripts is what they're called. And so, yeah, so a part of my CI/CD pipeline was deploying up to Aurora using code and setting that up. So I could even show you within my Java code. It takes in my application. So like within my answer code here, it takes in this information of how I'm defining things, and it actually creates based off of my models, in this case, my whole database schema, which is pretty cool. So you had a question over here. Yeah. Yeah, that is a very good point. And that's where I think my confidence going to this, when it was Java, I know Java because I've read a lot of books, and most books are based off of Java. Like a lot of them are Java or C++ books. And so the other thing is I know Java is object oriented, and I'm very familiar with object oriented, both in PHP, very object oriented, and then even some of our Node stuff, we kind of get a little object oriented, but it's more functional. And so I know how object oriented works. I know how all the paradigms work. I know how these migrations work, and all of them, they're a little bit different. Like Ruby, Python, they all do everything just a little bit different as far as syntax. So it's a very good point to just understand how this stuff works, because it's all very translatable to somewhere else. And that's where at the end of the day, code is code. You know, that's where I really believe, like, even the React stuff gets pretty impressive, how it's just a bunch of functions basically is how they're building it right now. And even like React a couple of years ago with some of how it was building, it was kind of object oriented. They were doing a lot of implementation. They've really moved to functional style coding. But that's where you start to realize you're like, oh, the things I'm learning in React is actually very applicable to the things I can do in the back end if I'm doing it right. Yeah. 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 Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So my Java was backend. So my whole API is built in Java. My front end is built in Angular. So like my Angular code, you know, it's built with TypeScript. This is my Angular code. So I have a bunch of components over here. I have the components. I have a conversation component over here. I have my history dialog, which is just the sidebar. I have an app component. And so this is all built within here. I have the, you know, obviously like my components along with the HTML of where I, you know, there's a recent conversation which has more information, but so my front end's in Angular. To answer your question there. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely used a lot of different, there's a lot of them. Like there's, I do have controllers. I don't use, I use entities, not models, and there's no views. I don't do any front end with it. And so it's kind of like an MVVM or something like that. Like, but I use repositories. So there's a lot of different things I use within it. We could definitely get into it. My goal isn't to talk a ton about the Java, but I do think the experience of having to learn Java is very similar. I haven't had to use that experience in a while, and it felt very applicable for a lot of people I know that are going through the same thing here, where I don't know those things, right? And that's the funny part is I've been engineering for 10 years, and you still run into that. And so just know, like, experienced people run into the same thing. The question is how you approach that, and that's what people want to see is what's your mentality? How do you do it? Can you push through it? Because even once you get hired, there's a lot of those times, and so I felt imposter syndrome a lot throughout the way of like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing here, you know, and you just get through it and you have to push through it and just have the, positive mental attitude throughout it. So I hope that for everybody here, we'll end here. I appreciate all of the questions, and I hope that if anybody has any further questions about any specific parts of this, feel free to reach out. I could have spent like 3 hours on this and gone further into OpenAI or any of these other things. I just felt like this was the most important. So appreciate everyone's time.